We have a packed agenda for today, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a few guidelines. This event will be recorded, but you will not appear because all of your videos are currently muted. As well, your volume is muted during this event so that we can keep all of our attention on our guest. The chat feature has been disabled. However, if you have a question, which we'll get to during the Q&A section, you can submit your question at the bottom in the Q&A feature. Additionally, closed captioning is available. To turn it on, click on the icon at the bottom of your screen and select your preference. Hi, my name is Ariana King. I am a senior support specialist here at Meetup. I'm also the co-founder and one of the organizers of Meetup in Color. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's event on dismantling social justice focused on bold allyship with Netta Jenkins. At Meetup, we believe in the importance of equity and social justice, both internally and externally. After the success of our Meetup Live event, How to Dismantle Social Justice, we've decided to continue fostering these important conversations through our new series, Dismantling Social Injustice. Thank you again for joining us. For its third installment, we've discussed voting rights, justice, urban policy, and more. Today, we will focus on allyship for underrepresented groups, including women, people of color, and the LGBTQIA+. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our distinguished guest, Netta Jenkins. Netta is an acclaimed author and advisory board member for Betterment online investment company. She has years of experience specializing in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, with a background in communications, leadership, and behavioral psychology. For 5 years, Netta created and executed strategy as vice president for global inclusion for IAC, InterActiveCorp, tech and media brands with her research data-driven knowledge. Netta has won multiple awards for corporate and startup diversity impact. Netta founded Holistic Inclusion Consulting LLC and offers diversity sessions to companies with a focus on anti-racism, product inclusion, and systemic bias globally. As a result, Netta was listed in Forbes as one of the top 7 impactful diversity anti-racism consultants in the world. Netta is also co-founder, advisor of Dipper, a data technology platform empowering companies to tackle diversity and inclusion, as well as a digital safe space that guides professionals of color to a better workplace, one review at a time, whether good, bad, or indifferent. Netta, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you. I always like to start off with my personal story so you can kind of understand a little bit more of what diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging means to me. So in my personal experience, I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood where we experienced severe and extreme racism. At the age of 7, I watched a white woman spit in my mother's face, and I watched the spit drip down her cheek as this woman said, "Blacks don't belong in my neighborhood." I was 7 years old and I was silent. I want you to take a moment and reflect on what you would do in this very situation. Now, you are practicing allyship and you watch this woman spit in my mom's face and you watch the spit drip down. What would you do in that moment? What would you do after that moment? My mom was in disbelief and fearful of what would happen if she retaliated or decided to call the cops because she could be considered the perpetrator solely because of the color of her skin. She would not be viewed as the victim. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you, guiding you on the path towards something I'd like to call bold allyship. We've heard the word ally used and then used some more. And although it makes for a cute, catchy, and captivating hashtag, it also comes with great responsibility. I want you all to take a journey with me. This journey requires open eyes, taking in the imagery of words like privilege, humanity, and systemic racism. Open ears to listen, receive, and extrapolate from the imparted knowledge given in today's discussion. And an open heart to then unpack, unlearn, and begin the process of being an authentic, sincere, bold ally. Now let's talk about performative allyship. Let's begin with a case study. Carefully listen to the scenarios A and B and C. Consider the reality of both instances and determine which scenario you most identify with. So we'll start off with scenario A. You're a new employee at an organization. You realize the population largely consists of cisgender, heterosexual white men. In weekly meetings, you witness your queer coworker restate and correct their pronouns when team members refer to them as she and hers instead of they and them. You noticed coworker frustrations, and they express to you that they feel unheard, unseen, and disregarded. The next meeting, you take it upon yourself to address your teammates, sharing the importance and necessity of proper pronoun usage. Now, although uncomfortable, willing to risk your newfound acquaintances and even job, you made a concerted effort to advocate for them and ensure your work environment is suitable, safe, and fair for all. Now, scenario B, you've witnessed the COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately impact Black and Brown communities. You've seen the horrific death of George Floyd. You've heard about the influx of Black trans murders, experiencing many emotions like sadness, helplessness, fear, and even frustration. You know that something is wrong, but you don't know what to do about it. You know that if you don't say something, you'll be judged or seen as unsupportive or indifferent. You learn about Blackout Tuesday and you decide to post a Black square on Instagram and hashtag Black Lives Matter. Now at work, you witness your Black and Brown employees' lack of participation and overhear conversations with other coworkers who don't know how to address Black and Brown people during these times. So they say, wonder if they're okay. These are such crazy times, huh? These protests are getting out of control, and I don't know what to do. So you feel the same way, and you remain silent because to address these issues is too uncomfortable. Now, scenario C, you're riding in an Uber, and as you and your driver engage in conversation, you discover he's an older Hispanic veteran. So you're conversing about the struggles of balancing both work and parenthood when he's suddenly pulled over by a police officer. You witness the officer threaten and use derogatory terms to address him. You sit in the car for 20 minutes as the police officer interrogates your driver and continues to ask if you are safe. Now, the officer accuses your driver of changing lanes illegally when he did not. The officer proceeds to give your driver a ticket. You're angry and disheartened that your driver had to experience this, but worse yet, you're late for work. You choose to empathize with your driver and acknowledge that he was treated unfairly. So you discuss with him that he should dispute the ticket as he's done nothing wrong. He insists, though, that you let it go because stuff like this happens all of the time. So you respect his decision and instead you zelay him the amount of the ticket. So you ask if there's anything you can do for the driver. He begins to vent about how this keeps happening to him and he's tired. You listen without interrupting. You both walk away a little lighter. Which scenario do you most identify with? I want you to think about that for a bit. Now, before we dive into what bold allyship is, let's uncover what it is not. Performative allyship, as seen in scenario B, is when someone from a non-marginalized group professes and claims to support a marginalized group in a way that either isn't helpful or that actively harms that group. It usually involves the quote unquote ally, receiving some kind of reward, right? Social media pat on the back or emoji praying hands for being a good person or on the right side. Now, scenario A and C are examples of true allyship. When someone from a non-marginalized group uses their privilege to advocate for a marginalized group, they transfer the benefits of their privilege to those who lack it. So our journey continues. For today's discussion, I've simplified the word ally to an acronym. Ally stands for always listening, learning, and then yielding. So when you consider an ally, words like friend, support, in my corner, confidant, team player, and advocate may come to mind. We consider allies when we reflect on past experiences with childhood friends, teammates on our old sports teams, or favorite aunt who slips us $20 every visit, or even the bubbly barista at our favorite coffee shop who supports our terrible caffeine habits. However, today, we will unveil the truth about authentic and bold allyship. Now, on a basic level, it's finding a common humanity, recognizing that no matter your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your ability, your religion, your creed, your favorite president, your ice cream flavor, we are all human beings. This very understanding begins our journey to truly uncover how we can be a bold ally. So let me take it a step back. Let's talk about some history here. Historically, Americans are challenged to finding humanity due to the diverse array of people who come in contact with on a day-to-day basis. It's easier and more natural to identify with someone from the same religion, same ethnic group, same hometown, or same sports team. Now, let's imagine this. Imagine moving to America, to a big city, with no real sense of belonging quite yet. What do? Gravitate to those who you think most understand you naturally, right? However, if you qualify and almost confine this sameness to be the color of one's skin, difference in language, or socioeconomic status, you negate an entire population of people who may relate to you on another and even deeper level. So if you only commune, identify, or even work with people solely based on your comfort zone, you'll find that you consciously or unconsciously othered people, making what you could have been a community referred to as us, now a community that is us versus them. Now, don't get me wrong, othering is at the core of American culture and society. The others were enslaved or incarcerated or murdered or came here to achieve the American dream, but were thwarted in pursuit. Indigenous nations were nearly reduced out of existence, and numerous others were and are still targeted due to religion, financial, economic, or even social status. So we understand that othering was a process and a strategic plan of power, and establishing roles for who's who and who isn't. And for the most part, we can agree that this structure was flawed and subjective. However, I want us to take a good look at today's society and even ourselves. This part of our journey requires our full participation and engagement. If you are willing, I'd like for you to consider the answers to these questions. Have you ever been called a derogatory slur based on otherness? Has someone ever overlooked you, your voice, perspective, or opinion due to otherness? Has someone ever commented on your otherness in a form of a compliment or insult? Has someone ever referred to your otherness as exotic, different, or cool? Has your otherness been dehumanized, appropriated, or utilized poorly? Have you ever been bullied based on an other characteristic like race, age, gender, or sexual orientation? Now, in searching for the answers to these questions, what thoughts come up for you? What people came to your mind? How do you feel? This exercise reveals that we as a society, in fact, haven't done much of a good job dismantling this concept of other, just enabled and perpetuated it. Let's get into the acronym, right? I wanted to make it very simple for folks to practice and to think about on an ongoing basis. Ally, the A is for always learning, the L for listening, and Y for yielding. So the textbook definition of allyship is the lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and or groups of people. We can begin to dissect the many populations, subgroups, and individuals that comprise these marginalized groups. But part of allyship is actually taking into consideration who needs it and when. When a house is on fire, the firemen don't utilize their noble efforts on all the houses in the neighborhood, just the one that's rapidly smoldering in flames. So if you have been present in the last few months, you have witnessed the racial pandemic incited by the tragic murder of George Floyd, compounded by the already existing disproportionate rate of Black and brown deaths due to COVID-19. Now, the A or always in allyship compels us to consistently keep abreast of these systemic issues. It's the continuous immersion of oneself into the process of being an ally. It's more than an informative post, deeper than reading a book, and beyond a day of DEI training. It even exceeds posting, talking about it, right? So when we think about the Me Too movement, your political affiliation, Breonna Taylor, or the lack of resources and accesses for differently abled folks, it always calls us to action. It always requires you. So that's the L in ally, which brings us to our second letter, L. L stands for learn. How can we be called to action as an ally with no tools, understanding, or strategy on how we can act? This question in and of itself is an example of privilege. And the first thing that we need to learn is privileges, power, and proper utilization. Now, the textbook definition shares that privilege is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted to or available only to a particular person or group. Writer St. Ferguson expounds upon the definition of a little more, sharing that these advantages are unlearned benefits given to people who fit into a specific social group. Now, in my experience, whenever people hear the word privilege, it instills feelings and thoughts of guilt and discomfort. People assume that this means that their good character is in jeopardy of their life changes and personal struggles don't matter. They respond to this concept of privilege with, it's not my fault. I didn't do that. I didn't ask for this. I don't know what to do about it. Understand that having privilege is not an accusation or a death sentence, but also keep in mind that just like you, Black and brown folks, veterans, women, members of the LGBTQ plus population, and differently abled persons also have thoughts and feelings like, it's not my fault. I didn't ask for this, and I don't know what to do about it. At this moment, I want us to reflect on the word privilege. Assess the ways in which you've experienced or utilized it. Let's think about this a bit. If this is the first time that you're reflecting on this concept, that's an example of privilege. If you've been able to avoid this very conversation and navigate freely in your home, workspace, or social circles without discussing topics like ableism, racial, and ethnic disparity or LGBTQ plus rights, that in fact is privilege. If you've been able to tune out during this conversation due to discomfort or lack of understanding or interest, that is privilege. There's no denying that each of us have it, some more than others, but what do we do with it is the question. The late John Lewis once said, who I'm a huge fan of, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something and you have to do something. And I thought that quote was so powerful. What are we doing in the moments where no one is watching us? Now, if you benefit from privilege, then you are in a position to create change, right? That's a positive thing. In the case of racism, the marginalized cannot affect this change alone. It's those who benefit from the deep-rooted, crooked system that need to work from within to change that structure, to assist with that. We've seen it manifest in front of our eyes in these last few months. Now, more than ever, people are uniting in allyship to dismantle flawed systems, eradicate outdated ideologies, and initiate these very difficult conversations to promote equity and inclusion. Now, as a result, we're anticipating reform. We're witnessing the proposing and passing of laws and calling for the revision of many policies and practices. Now, you may be thinking, I'm not comfortable with protesting, or I'm not up to date with the changes being made so rapidly. Our L, which is learn in allyship, calls for you to seek other ways in which you can begin to be an asset. Discover the ways in which you can utilize your power, voice, ability, and even privilege. So the beginnings of this can look like asking folks with pronouns they prefer, correcting your family members when they use a racial slur, following pages on social media that keep you abreast of current issues, donating to anti-bias campaigns and initiatives, really rethinking, where am I putting my money? There are actually many organizations, notable ones in fact, that if I said their names, you would be like, oh my goodness, that are so, and that actually were deep rooted in the slave trade. So thinking about even that, where am I putting my money, right? And so we can unpack after what some of those organizations may be, or learning about concepts like microaggressions that are small in stature, but painful in effect. Microaggressions are daily, verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile or negative slights toward people of color. So these can look like not being considered a part of the team that, where they're working at. Assuming one speaks or prefers a certain language due to their perceived ethnic background, misconstruing honesty and assertiveness for being feisty or aggressive, demeaning or dismissing the beauty and uniqueness of Black and brown hair, right? So every time, one may see a Black or brown person coming in with natural hair and then maybe switching it up with braids, having to comment on that is a form of a microaggression, implying that straight hair is dominant and prettier, being surprised by the notion of a Black or brown person being articulate or well-educated, making a note that a Black or brown people cannot afford an affluent living space, right? And assuming one has the right or privilege to infringe upon another person's personal space. So in this moment, I want us to reflect on the ways in which we have perpetuated or even experienced microaggressions. These daily slights create and perpetuate chronic and persistent health issues, and specifically that happens within the Black and brown community, professionals of color, right? And studies reflect that they are more likely to experience depression, low self-esteem, negative affect pain, fatigue, and even death. In a study that I was a part of, 405 professionals of color link microaggressions to suicide. So to even think of one potentially taking their life because someone said a microaggression is saddening. So when people ask me, Netta, what does diversity, equity, inclusion mean to you? I respond empathetically. It's a matter of life and death. It's a vital and fundamental aspect of our world, our country, our life, and even our workplace. Learning about microaggressions is a great step in the direction of bold allyship. So you want to become well-versed in the many ways in which Black and Brown communities, veterans, Asians, women, members of LGBTQIA population, and differently abled folks experience disproportionate rates of bias, prejudice, and systemic issues is an essential and integral part of allyship. So if you can understand the idea that although a behavior, thought, or action may not affect or offend you, some things can still create harm for others, even in the workplace, then we're getting somewhere. So for some of you, you may be caught up to speed and in the know about concepts like microaggressions and may even feel comfortable confronting or calling them out. But for those who have recently begun their bold allyship journey and don't feel quite as comfortable jumping into the battlefield just yet, you can follow our next step. Listen. That's the L in ally, which brings us to our focus on what it is to then listen. Allyship is not self-defined. It's work, right? And efforts must be recognized by those you are seeking to ally with. What good is your allyship if you are not actually helping those who you claim to support? It's important to understand the need, but more importantly, to listen for how you can help or contribute to that need. Be aware that this country's narrative is shaped by and reflective of one perspective, one history, one common understanding. However, this perspective, history, and understanding is not complete. This narrative excuses, eradicates, and dismisses the presence, efforts, and contributions of others like Black, Latinx, Indigenous folks, Asians, LGBTQ+, and differently abled folks. Listening will actually, it implores us to activate attentiveness, being fully present when someone shares their experiences, empathy, validating and affirming different experiences, and even silence when the moment calls for it. So let's practice. In middle school, a young white boy said in front of other students, I heard your family is from Africa, Netta. Let me see how far and fast you can climb this tree. A young boy said that to me. That's something I'll never forget, right? And so think about even those that have these drastic experiences. He said, I heard your family is from Africa. Let me see how far and fast you can climb up this tree. When I share this story, it often evokes feelings of anger, confusion, pain, and injustice. For some, they may want to share their own experiences as a means to relate, or share how their experience is worse, or overlook the pain and the trauma that stemmed from that interaction when I was in middle school. But bold allyship requires us to sit in the shoes of the storyteller. And although we may never fully understand, we can try. This is not to be misconstrued with asking people to explain, share, or teach their experiences to you. However, when they choose to speak, including on social media, listen without questioning. Don't challenge, but take it in. And if you doubt what you are hearing, that means you need to keep listening and listening more. Keep in mind, one person representing a marginalized group does not represent their entire cohort. Keep in mind that others too come from many different backgrounds, have varying opinions and different cultural contexts and intersectionalities. Below are examples of statements misconstrued as allyship. Please be mindful that they take away from the experiences of marginalized groups. And please reflect on these statements. Although pure in intention, they can be damaging and dismissive. Here are a couple examples. Let's celebrate your similarities rather than our differences. I had no idea how bad it is and the injustices. I don't see color. The blacks. Chinese versus their actual cultural background. Disabled people versus differently abled. LGBT versus LGBTQIA+. We have to stop seeing things in black and white and just come together. That's something that's also divisive. Can't we just all be friends? That's also dismissive. So those are some things to think about that really put a halt on the bold allyship movement and practice. Bold allies do the work to dismantle these thoughts in themselves and in others. They reconsider the ways in which they approach certain situations. They reflect and process the mistakes they've made and take up accountability for them. And just to make it clear, being a bold ally doesn't mean you don't make mistakes. It just means you're committed to the ongoing process of learning and listening. We may not comprehend the gravity and magnitude of certain experiences or walks of life. And sometimes our own privilege may want to assert itself in conversations in which our perspectives differ. However, a bold ally task is to yield to that differing perspective, which brings us to our final point and last letter, why. So why in ally? When I assessed the word yield, other words like submit, surrender, give away came to mind. I was immediately brought back to a principle I learned as a child, and I now teach my own children. And it's very simple. Sharing is caring. Allyship is the living representation of this sentiment. Yielding requires us to step outside of our comfort zones, to incorporate others' perspective, worldviews, values, and cultures. Yielding requires us to activate radical empathy or the curiosity about others. This is not to be misconstrued with questioning or imposing on people in your quest to learn about them. This simply means having the conversation with the person next to you on the train, the waitress at the restaurant, the secretary at your doctor's office. Engaging in fruitful dialogue expands our horizons, creating for a more welcoming, inclusive, and culturally aware conversation. Then we can begin to understand one another and really discover the beauty in our humanity. So yielding can be utilized in experiences as well, like traveling to another country, eating at a certain restaurant, engaging in social media dialogue, or interacting with coworkers. So how often have we yielded to customs, traditions, and language of the country we frequent, creating the space for us to experience the country versus the country experiencing us? How often have we mindlessly gone to an ethnic restaurant without researching its history or culture? How often have we been quick to challenge a social media post because we disagreed instead of asking clarifying questions? And how often have we conversed with our coworkers about topics other than our jobs? Yield into unconventional ways of allyship. Yield into creative ways to support. Vote, protest, donate, email, petition, lobby, engage, converse, listen. Use your privilege. Yielding requires your discomfort. It can't thrive in complacency. If it's easy, you're not doing it right. I'm going to repeat that again. If it's easy, you're not doing it right. Keep in mind that allyship makes room for mistakes as it's a part of the process. Yield into those mistakes. Okay, you have improperly used someone's pronoun. Acknowledge it. Apologize for it, correct yourself, and be more mindful going forward. Okay, you have witnessed a person of color disposition change after a comment you made. Acknowledge that you may have made a mistake and ask for clarity. Okay, you have seen a woman be called out of her name on your way to work, but you didn't have the courage or time to say something. Reflect on why. Really take a moment and process what impacted your ability to utilize your privilege in a moment when it was so necessary. Now, I want to give a good example of this. My friend, a white woman, addressed with another white woman who is well respected in her industry about the impact of something said about Black women in a public post that that person created. My friend sought to discuss its very impact on Black women reading it. And so my friend was actually met with a fear level of defensiveness, which she did not expect given her friend's commitment to women's advancement in her career. Now, my friend remained open, encouraging her fellow white woman that this was a powerful moment for education, which is an essential and key practice for those practicing bold allyship. Now, in spite of her connections, being in denial and resistant, my friend hopes that her connection will not rest on her long record of supporting women to think that there's no work left to be done. Even this one conversation, communicating how Black women's experience is wholly different from white women's, and that intentions do not equate with impact, led my friend to tell me, Netta, practicing allyship is not easy. And I replied then, imagine being a Black person 25/7. Now, being that ally, bold ally that she is, she understood this too. And so she welcomed the opportunity to listen and learn. Again, meaning she's practicing allyship. Now, my friend in the same industry as her connection, she was okay though, with the potential risk of what might result from her connection reaction to the truth. And in the end, she and I agree, if you are practicing allyship and it makes everyone feels happy, then you're not doing it right. If you are practicing allyship and you haven't risked anything, then you are not doing it right. So in closing, let's recap our word ally once more. A, always be committed to the process of bold allyship. Never cease in your pursuit to engage in difficult conversations, advocate for those in need, and learn. Especially many of us are in the workplace or own our own businesses. Think about those folks. Think about people from marginalized groups. Think about specifically also the Black and brown people within your workplace. How are they feeling? Are they being faced with microaggressions? What is that driving them to? Remember the stat I put out, 405 professionals of color, specifically Black and brown people, link microaggressions to suicide. So how do we end that? How are we giving people opportunities? How are they being promoted? Right, so we want to know about those things and be very inquisitive. Distinguish your performative allyship from bold allyship. Hold yourself and others accountable in the workplace, dinner table, and in public. L, learn some more. Continue to educate yourself. Like I said, you want to start understanding, hey, where am I using my money? Which organizations do I or companies do I shop from on a regular basis that may have been deeply rooted or embedded in slavery? And they've been able to progress. Doing the research there, so reading the books and watching documentaries and videos, engaging in fruitful conversations And then seeking the knowledge about unconscious bias, current events, and ways to perform bold allyship. The other L is to listen. So when all else fails, you want to listen. When you don't understand, again, you just listen. When you don't know what to say, you simply listen. Listen for your thoughts and worldviews. Listen for that of others. And most importantly, listen to hear the needs of those you wish to be an ally to. The why in ally is yield. Yield into the discomfort, understanding that the role of a bold ally is not an easy one. Yield into the perspectives of others. Yield and tap into feelings and thoughts of empathy. And most importantly, 100% yield into your humanity, as that's where you'll discover the common good in all of us. Thank you so much, and I look forward to some of your questions.
Netta, thank you so much for all of that wonderful information. I hope everyone has walked away with a new nugget or two, and we're going to jump right into the Q&A. Again, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A icon, and you can go ahead and type them in. Sophia asked, how do you manage in a company that does not see that they are driven by white supremacy values and a company that is seen to the outside as a good, progressive company?
That's an exceptional question, and one that I've been getting often. I think one of the things that has to happen, and what has been happening, the organizations that don't see what's happening, the turmoil that's happening, the white supremacy that is existing within their organization, will ultimately dissolve. And I say that because I work with many different clients, and I remember there was this client recently that reached out to me based in LA and said, Netta, I don't know what we're going to do. I know that we need some training. I know something needs to be done. For a long time, I've been telling leadership we have this issue. Now, after George Floyd's murder, people are coming out and they're speaking about the injustice. They're speaking about how they've been microaggressed. And all it took were for 1 to 2 people to share that publicly. That company is now no longer open. Customers, right? Because there are people practicing bold allyship. Customers immediately withdrew. And so I think that is something that companies, organizations have to think about. If you are kind of leading initiatives at your company, bring out an oops deck, and say, hey, here's what's happening with other organizations. We take a look at even Facebook. Facebook lost out on $7 billion within a week because advertisers pulled out due to them not really making a strong stance on what's happening, right? And even on a political level. It's now, organizations are now seeing that it will in fact drive your organization to the ground if these things continue to exist.
Well, that is a warning if I've ever heard one. Joyce asked, on the topic of always learning, referencing back to the allyship, do you recommend bringing up topics of race with brown and black people, or does that just otherize them more, pushing them to take a spokesperson role that they might not embrace?
Yeah, definitely don't make anyone the spokesperson, for sure. One of the things that many marginalized groups deal with, and specifically I'll call out black and brown professionals, especially in workplaces, is having to always be that spokesperson, and the psychological trauma behind it that persists can really drive that person literally to hurting themselves. And so I think people really need to be conscious about how they go about it, right? I think there are professionals in this industry. Kudos to meetup.com and meetup groups, because I think, this is the stance to take. They're saying, well, let's get a professional and let's not just put it on our black and brown employees or make someone kind of that spokesperson. So you really want to reach out to those folks that are really doing this line of work, to get more understanding, and then you can kind of approach it a little differently and share what you've learned. Hey, and I think it's okay for you to then, maybe go up to your Black and Brown colleagues or folks that you're connected to or other marginalized groups and say, here's what I'm learning, and here's how I'm going to start making this impact and change. I'd like to collaborate with you on this. So that's a more strategic way to do it.
Yeah, definitely meeting your friends halfway.
Yeah, definitely. I call it, it's about collaborating, right? At the end of the day, we are all human beings, right? And so when we start to think about it in that form and fashion, there's just so much synergies that we can create in doing that.
All right, so let's try and get in these last few questions. An anonymous viewer asked, what is the incentive for the ally to practice allyship?
Ooh, so the incentive, that's a very good question. One, I would say if someone's looking for an incentive to practice allyship, then maybe allyship isn't for that person. That person should not be looking for an incentive in it. For them, it should be, these are other human beings that are being attacked, that are being dehumanized, that some of them are even committing suicide when we look at the stats. And these are human beings, right? And so they should not be suffering from this type of trauma. They should not be suffering from the large disparity and the large gaps. What can I do as another human to make sure that these people are protected? Because the same can happen to that person. So I think if our thought is, what's the incentive, that's kind of the wrong path to be on.
Yep, I agree with you totally. Another anonymous user asks, how does one address microaggressors or people who talk to us in derogatory tones or words?
Yeah. That's the hard part, right? Because I think a lot of the times and I'll speak to the Black and Brown experience just as a Black woman. I've been microaggressed before. The challenging part in that is, in the moments where you're microaggressed, you're alone, right? And so the feeling of, think about if you go to a party, or if you've been to an event where you kind of was a guest of someone else, and so you really don't know the people and you're kind of othered and you're standing back. It's the same experience, but even worse, 10 times worse, where you don't know what to do. And for a lot of Black and Brown professionals specifically, or folks from marginalized groups, when they are microaggressed, they simply put their head down. They put their head down and hope that there's going to be a shift or a change. And I think what's happening now, what I'm seeing happen now is, and stats is showing this, more people from marginalized groups, and specifically Black and Brown people, are less afraid of the retaliation from HR, because we've seen that kind of in the past when you kind of share what you're going through, even from a microaggression standpoint, and a lot more bolder in what's happening. And so I think in the moments of where now, if someone microaggressed me, I'll stop them kind of in their traps and say, hey, what you just said, let me share with you kind of the impact of that, right? And I could give you a specific example. This is a lighter form of microaggression, but I remember when I used to work for a pretty well-known, huge organization, there was my colleague of mine would say, yo, Netta, yo, Netta, let's go pick up some lunch today. And I was taken back because, one, that's not how I speak. And two, I'm like, well, he doesn't do that to anyone else, right? So now he's putting me in this box, and I'm not sure what he watched that has his perception of, okay, all Black and Brown people maybe talk this way, or this is what they're looking for. But I had to stop him in his tracks, and I had to say, hey, that's not how I speak, right? I think another form of a microaggression as well, recently a friend told me that she had launched a survey out to the organization, and one of the employees hit replied all to tell her what she was missing on the survey. And so she's at a leadership level. That's a microaggression. Did that person ever do that to one of the other executives? Never. But because that woman is a woman of color and in a leadership position, there was that leeway and okayness, if I could create a word, of kind of calling that person out in front of everyone, right? And this person was not on a leadership level. There's also the forms of microaggression where there's disparity in promotion, there's disparity in compensation, right? And you start looking at it, and I remember a woman of color crying to me and saying, I watched every single person on my team that was white essentially move up, and I was the only one left behind. So that feeling of otherness. So that there's a lot there, but I think a lot of people are getting a lot bolder in calling it out due to the psychological trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. So a two-part question from Mark. He asked, what advice do you have for a white cis male boomer like me who sometimes struggles to distinguish between opportunities to be involved and use our voice and privilege to be an ally versus stepping in when a person wants to handle a negative situation without me, and I end up being patronizing instead of helpful?
Yeah, I think that's when you want to kind of start to revert to listen, right? Make sure that you're listening to what's happening, what's going on within the world, within kind of your confines, your environment. And then I also think there's nothing wrong with you stepping into spaces where you are in fact the only one. A lot of the times that helps us. So I can give one example there. The industry that I've been heavily invested in has been the technology space. And so there is a major conference called Afrotech, right? And so I've been to Afrotech twice, but at Afrotech, there's probably close to about 10,000 Black and brown people in one room, all technologists, brilliant minds. But I only saw just a handful of white people, right? Or people from other races. And I was just like, well, that's such a miss, because here's an opportunity for one to be in a different space where you may feel a little uncomfortable, but you get to be immersed in the culture. You get to learn. People are open about talking about their experiences, but you also get to meet new people, make new friends. And the big thing there is you begin to listen and you begin to learn. And I think the more we start to step out of the box of putting ourselves in spaces where we are the only ones, we will not only get to see how other people from marginalized groups feel, but then we'll also be able to kind of expand our horizon a bit and be more strategic about our approaches.
All right, we have a request for resources from both Rebecca and Lila. Rebecca asks, is there a book or site that you find credible to further educate herself and on what is and isn't effective allyship? And Lila asks for documentaries that you might recommend.
Ooh, Lila, I love that. I would say head to nettajenkins.com. There is a tab there that says resources. And so I list a bunch of books. I'm going to be adding documentaries today, Lila, now that you say it. There's a bunch that I've been watching. And just kind of different articles as well that you can tap into. So definitely head to nettajenkins.com, click on resources, and you can start seeing some of the books and some of the resources that I have on that page.
And while you're there, Netta also has a really awesome blog that I've been reading through. So
awesome, thank you.
Emmanuel asks, how do we educate our communities and organizations that diversity is not an organization charity? We are bringing our talent to the organization to increase profits. We are only asking for fair treatment that does not dehumanize us.
Exactly. Spot on. I feel everything in that question and that message.
Yeah.
I think that's been going on a lot, right? Like a lot of organizations, even some people that have just started to practice allyship almost are starting to see it as a charity. And I'm like, no. The only thing that marginalized groups, and I'll specifically also speak on the topic of Black and brown people, are asking for is just to be at an even playing field, right? And so when I think about that, I start to even think on a VC, like a venture capital kind of level. 0.2% of Black women receive venture capital. 0.1% of Latinx women receive venture capital, right? The numbers are so low compared to even what white women receive and what overall men receive. And so when we look at the numbers, it's simply just saying, can we be at the same playing field here, right? And that's what we start to talk about equity. How are we then giving people the opportunity and the access to then be able to advance, right? So if you have a marginalized group that's here, and then you have, the majority group that's here, we're going to have to level that up a bit in order to kind of move in the same pace, or else it's going to be, there's going to be rapid disparity.
Yeah.
And so, and that's what we're seeing happening. So yes, it's definitely not a charity for sure.
All right. So, I think that's all of the questions that we have for you. We really appreciate you spending this time with us. I'm going to share a little information about Meetup, but first I want to let everyone know, if you'd like to learn more about Dipper, go to www.ourdipper.com. To learn more about HIC, go to www.holisticinclusion.com. To learn more about Allyship, you can take Netta's course at anti-racism-course.teachable.com. We also have some more information about Meetup, some of the efforts that we are currently participating in. We have a pro network that is dedicated to fighting for racial justice for Black people. If you have a group that you would like to be entered into this network, you can visit us here. If you'd like to get more information about scheduling tools and our beta program, or you can subscribe to our newsletter with any of the links shared here. Again, Netta, thank you so much for your time and your energy sharing all of this wonderful information with us. We really appreciate it.